one of the things that was common during the Civil War was the fact that fallen soldiers couldn't be sent home. Their loved ones might get a letter from a commanding officer, but they often were buried in the field. Sometimes Confederates and Union soldiers side by side, sometimes not. And there were no facilities for elaborate marble or granite headstones. There was no facilities other than a shovel and whatever tools you could hack out a crude wooden headpiece and mark their grave. This was the best that could be done. There was huge loss of life in the Civil War, and there just was not the means to deal with the massive loss of humanity other than to bury them where they fell on the battlefield. Now again, there was no battle here in Fort Pierce. These are representations just to demonstrate for you how a Civil War battlefield grave site would have been constructed. Very crude, couple of pieces of wood, the person's name and rank perhaps, and that's about it. If they knew the person's birth date, certainly the day they fell, and that's about all there was. Okay, we now are on the other side of the river. We come over the small bridge over by where the cemetery site was that I showed you just a little bit ago, and have entered what I believe is the Confederate encampment. And so the Union is encamped on the other side, and this is the Confederate encampment. These would have represented the troops from the 7 or so states that had seceded from the Federal Union in 1861. And so you'll notice that our couple of reenactors here dressed with gray, where the Union were in blue. So again, not a fairly common thing to know the blue and the gray. The interesting thing is to notice that the flags, that some of the flags are the stars and bars, the Dixie flag, if you will, and some are not. And that depended on the division, I guess, that you served with, or the state that you served from. These were often state flags or regimental flags. There was a lot of flags. So, and we have these two folks have no idea who I am or what I'm doing, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. So, I'm Paul Campbell.
Nice to meet you.
Hi. And
Lori.
Lori, nice to meet you. I run a video blog called The Real United States. And so I decided that we should include one of the things that's very common here in the United States, and that's Civil War reenactments, and how we teach our young people and adults as well about a very significant period in our history. So,
what you stumbled upon here is medical.
So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. We have a medical facility here in the Confederate camp, and yeah, not pretty. Necessary, highest technology of the day, but again, not good circumstances, and often, well, almost exclusively done in the field. You couldn't move somebody to the city. It wasn't like in Gone with the Wind, where you could move them to a hospital in Atlanta. A lot of this was done in the field to save someone's life, or to mitigate the damages that were done in battle. And a lot of these instruments appear to be actual period instruments. Some of them are.
Some of these are. Starting here with the saws, your capital saw, metatarsal saws, small bones in the hands. Come up here to a tool that's used to relieve pressure on the brain.
This is what would be called a trepanning tool for opening a hole in one's head.
And come over here to the various types of scalpels. Basically what these are, these would pull the veins out of the body to be sewn closed and shut while you're doing amputations. These are your amputation knives, the different styles of knives. Bone files. These right here are the various types of
Forceps, yes.
Sorry about that. Forceps, bone puller, bullet remover. Here is dentistry tools. From here. This is a pocket surgeon's kit. He would carry that in his pocket on the field. Mainly probably by a assistant surgeon who's directly at the line of battle, setting up a first aid station right on the field of battle as a first line of care. This all here would be in a amputation kit, would normally be in the hospital, field hospital.
Yeah, now what I should point out, folks, to make sure that I'm absolutely clear, is that there were field hospitals. Now, a field hospital was largely a big tent, usually. Sometimes a seized structure, a barn, a home, a commercial building. Often, though, depending on the battle, it would have been a tent. And it was a field hospital, so some people who were injured would be transported to the field hospital and adverse to being worked on directly where they lay. So depending on where you were in the battle, you got luckier and luckier if you could actually get to a city hospital. A field hospital was not quite as good, but still better than actually being worked on in the field. And this unfortunately very, very common. Of the probably 120,000 people that died, many other tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, were wounded in battle. So I'd like to thank you very much, folks. Appreciate your time. And good luck tomorrow.
This is black powder here. You know what? You know, like firecrackers, like what's in a firecracker? Black powder would be in here. The bullet.
Here again, you can see some of the nicer tents. These would actually be like field hospital tents. These are not like living tents. If we swing around to the other side, we're going to get to see what living tents, what the soldiers might have stayed in was. And basically, it's a frame with a canvas pulled over it, sometimes open on the ends, and really exposed a lot to the elements. And this was especially difficult in Florida. Now, there were only 7 battles that were actually fought in 9 battles that were fought in the state of Florida. But with the heat and the humidity and the high population of mosquitoes and other bugs, this would have been a pretty tough way to live. No air conditioning, no heat, whatever it happened to be, you were kind of exposed to. The only thing you wanted to basically keep off you is the rain. And so these were people who had it very tough. Now you'll notice that these young men here wearing the Confederate caps are not in a full uniform. This was not uncommon in that era because they couldn't afford uniforms. So they were issued a cap so that you knew which side they were on, and that was pretty much it. Many did have uniforms, but if you couldn't afford it, they drafted you anyway, and you went in your street clothes. You'll notice that, and the reason I want to point this out is, and I hope these young men don't mind, that these trousers, you'll notice, are beltless trousers held with some suspenders. These are period clothing, but this was the clothing of the era. They would go to war in whatever they came from, where they lived, because they couldn't afford or were not issued a uniform. That's essentially true, right, gentlemen? So they'd be issued a cap and a weapon and sent off to battle in their street clothes, essentially. And they had to do the best they could. And again, in very tight living quarters, in very hard conditions. And in 1861, I assure you, the bug population in Florida was goddamn believable. One of the things you cannot survive without in the 1860s, regardless of which side you were on, and that's a blacksmith. You needed someone skilled in working metal, because so many things were required to be made out of metal but couldn't be shipped in. They weren't manufactured somewhere else. There was not the infrastructure to ship things. A lot of the metalwork was made from raw stock on site. The smith would carry raw stock with him, and he would make any number of things, from things for cooking, or stakes for the tents, or any shoes for the horses, of course. I don't know if we're going to get an opportunity to see a cavalry unit, but the cavalry, the horses, of course, had to be shod, had to have a metal shoe to protect their hooves. So you had to have nails, which were hand forged, and the horseshoes, which were hand forged, and those sorts of things. And they did that over a coal fire that was then forced to be burn hotter with a bellows, sometimes a crank bellows. And sometimes the blacksmith would also be the farrier, and a farrier is someone who works on horses' hooves, who trims the nails and those sorts of things for the health of the horse. Here is what I was talking about. We have an air pump. It's a circular bellows. It's a mechanical bellows to drive more air into the heat, into the fire, to build up the heat, to bring the metal up to its plastic state so it could be. And here we actually have our blacksmith.
How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. Who's going to demonstrate, see how this mechanical bellows would drive air in, and you can see it's bringing that heat up, because more air, more fire, and your piece of iron here, that raw stock that he would carry with him, that he's heating up to form into whatever item it is that he's going to build. Coal was quite readily available in that day, depending on the part of the country you were in.
If they didn't have coal, they used chipped wood, and then they dried it in the fire. And I have some over here. Dried pieces of wood in the fire, and they turned it into charcoal. Wood pieces of charcoal, they would dry it, and that was what made it almost like coal, but not really. And then as it burned, then it got hot like coal did.
Right, so they were,
wasn't available.
whatever resources that they would have available to them,
Yep.
they would utilize to create enough heat to actually form the metal. You can see how this is getting nice and cherry red, and it's going to get this on the anvil now and start working it.
A little bit more heat.
And this was fairly common. They would work it a while with the specialized tools that they had, put it back in, heat it back up, continue to work it. They wouldn't actually quench it until they were finished with the actual piece. Now, as you saw him working it, you saw some little black scales coming off of it, perhaps, and those are scales of carbon that are working their way out of the metal. Because steel obviously is a combination of iron and carbon. It's a alloy, and as you put this in here, and this is a very high carbon-based fuel, you're actually putting more carbon in. And then as you work the iron, you work the carbon up to the surface, which actually makes it very, very hard on the surface. And you can see how nicely that bends for the gentleman, although I'm sure he's done this more than a time or two.
Yeah, a few times.
Sorry folks, another cannon report. One of the things you just get used to when you're in the Civil War. And you just keep on working. And that actually would not have been uncommon for this gentleman in the 1860s to more or less ignore the cannon fire and the rifle fire and to just keep on doing his job. Because his job was important. A horse, for example, that became unshod is useless. It can not serve for very long as a piece of cavalry. So the blacksmith could not afford to stop because of a battle. Although fortunately he was usually at a relatively safe distance. I think that's a fair statement, wouldn't you think? One of the things I'd like you to notice, ladies and gentlemen, that there's no pattern, there's no, I don't know, this is an art form. This gentleman can do this like an artist creating a sculpture because he's done it so many times. He was trained, performed as an apprentice to a blacksmith probably for years and was raised around it. And has learned how to shape whatever particular item it is. In the same way a sculptor sculpts out of stone or clay or wood or any other medium, he sculpts in iron. It's an art form as much as it is a science.
Down here on the table, I have step by step how a shoe is made from beginning to end. What you start out with. You do your heel bend, and when you crease, this is called a crease. You put the crease in there, you're pushing material out. So you have to push the material in then crease it, and then it pushes it back out straight. Then you do your other branch, same way, your other heel. Then you do your branch turn, start your nail holes. It's called with a 4-punch, which is the same size as the nail head. And then you pritchel it, what I'm going to do here shortly, and that punches the nail all the way through the material. And then you do the same on the other side, and that's what you wind up with. And there's different shoes for different purposes. These shoes here are for light draft horses. They have toe clips. They have heel caulks for traction. They have clips because the traction devices are like cleats, and they go into the ground and they're moving around. They have to have the clips on the sides to actually hold the shoe on, because they'll literally shear the nails right off.
Right.
So the clip, that's the purpose for the clips. They have Tennessee Walker shoes. They're toe weighted. They have heel caulks on them. The toe weightedness of a gated Tennessee Walker is because he uses such a knee action.
Right.
And they're very smooth riding. And people with back problems ride a lot of those in Pasafinos. And the Tennessee Walkers have the heavier shoes. They have the extension of the gait to make it better looking, so to speak. And these are Arab toe weighted shoes. That's my Jupiter that I do these for. And, so they're different shoes for different purposes.
Yeah, because as he says, these horses all have a different gait or a different style of walking. And he mentioned the Pasafino. Now, Pasos have a very unusual way of walking, because they take a longer stride with one set of legs than they do with their others. They take a longer stride with the rear legs and a very short, tight stride with the front legs. So you'd actually probably make a different set of shoes for the front than you would for the back on a Pasafino.
And horses have, and a lot of people don't know it, horses have different shaped feet. You look in the front shoe, the front foot is round.
Mm-hmm.
The hind shoe, or hind foot, is not. It's a diamond shape. Because of this, the way a horse is built,
Right.
his front feet support 60% of the weight, so they're wider
Right.
and bigger than the hind shoes. The hind shoes, or hind feet, are shaped the way that they are because they do one thing: they dig.
Right.
They dig so they have a pointier toe in the way that they're shaped, and they're supporting less weight.
Fascinating.
Just like on the light draft, you can definitely see how round they are and what diamond shaped they are.
So it's like I said, you would serve an apprenticeship, and you can see that this gentleman is, even in this day and age, has been doing this a while. I take it you shod horses for a living.
18 years, yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. That is fantastic.
The old tools that we use, they're similar to what they have today. And back in the old days, these are my great-grandfather's nippers in his raft.
I've had the unfortunate had to use these. These are farrier's tools that I was talking about earlier, that you would use for clipping the nails of the horse, and files also for shaping them and keeping them in good health. Thank you for joining us on the Real United States Video Blog. We'd like to thank you for joining us here in Fort Pierce, Florida, for the fictitious reenactment of the Battle of Fort Pierce. And we hope you've enjoyed this, and we hope that you have learned a few things along the line. If you have questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below, and we'd be happy to get back to you. We hope you'll take time to pick subscribe above and join us. You can always find us without cannon fire on Facebook or on MoTube. And as always, thank you for watching.